Today's guest, Aki Friedrich.
If I look back at it, I think I still know a lot of examples, moments when I spoke to one of my leaders and I had these aha moments like, oh dear, that's what I need to do, or this is how I can look at it differently. And what I would say as well, it's not always the direct leader that you have, but somebody that leads in a certain field or that you relate to, could even be a peer or a mentor, whatever it might be. But I think it has a huge impact on your journey. And whenever I was successful, I had great leaders. That's what I can say for sure.
Aki and I met at TaxFix, where he led learning and development, and I was an interim manager through PeopleWise, my company, and restructured talent acquisition. And we talked about meditation, learning concepts in schools versus at the workplace, the impact of your managers or manager in and learning and your learning curve, basically. And we also talked about his time as a musician when he worked at Apple and how he transitioned into the startup world and setting up compensation structures, strategies. And he's now leading learning and development, or called Learning Experience, at a remote-only company called Superside. Enjoy.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Hi Aki, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Well, it feels like an interview, like a job interview.
You also have a lot of cameras.
I'm prepared for this. No, I'm Aki, and I'm working in learning and development. I recently joined a new company called Superside, just 4 weeks ago actually, so it's really new. And before that, I worked at TaxFix, a scale-up from Berlin, and that's also where we met.
Yes.
So I worked there for 2.5 years, I think. And even before that, I had a little break, a time off, a period to spend with my family, a few months. And before that, I was working at Apple retail for 7 years.
Yes,
which
I saw
seems
that.
like a long time for, at least for people in scale-ups. It's like, seems like 3 lives. But originally I'm a musician by training, so I studied music in university.
That's so cool.
Yes, and worked also as a musician for a few years. So
what is a musician doing?
What is it?
No,
That's a really good question.
When I look it up on LinkedIn, it says music producer and soloist. What's that?
Yeah. So basically there were 2 parts to it. One part is producing music and in a computer in a studio for short films or commercials, whatever it might be. And the other part is that in university I studied saxophone, so an instrument that basically played in bands and orchestras and so
I
on.
always want to organize a party where there is a saxophonist on the table.
Okay, don't invite me. I haven't played for 12 years, I think.
Cool.
Yes.
And wow. And what made you decide going into music? I think that's super cool that people do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's not so common.
Mm-hmm. So I have 3 brothers and sisters. So we are 4 in total. I'm the smallest one. So basically, I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted. The other ones turned out fine. So I could choose basically. And no, I mean, I just, we all played an instrument and did some sports. So that was kind of the options that our parents gave us, saying, you can choose one instrument and one sport to do, which is, I think, is a good concept. And I chose the saxophone, and I just loved it. And, it turned out really well. And I seem to have a bit of talent as well, which helps in sticking with it. And then I think around 15, 16, I really got serious and practiced a lot and got to practice with great teachers. And it just developed. And then I decided to apply for university.
Are you from Stuttgart?
Yes, I'm born in Stuttgart, yes.
Cool. And there's also a university to it.
Exactly, yeah.
And what brought you to Berlin?
Still music. So music and love, I would say. So my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, she moved to Berlin while I was in Chile studying. And when I came back, I also wanted to move in with her, basically.
Oh, so you met her in Chile?
No, we met in school actually. So I knew her from long before, but then I did interchange for 6 months, 7 months in Valparaiso in Chile. Studied music still, saxophone in Chile actually. And then I came back and didn't want to go back, into my parents' home, but rather thought, moving in with my girlfriend is kind of the better option.
Okay.
And then I moved to Berlin and still studied a bit in Stuttgart, but yeah, mainly moved to Berlin.
Wow. And how did you decide on the shift to a corporate career or a startup scale-up career into tech from music? That's also uncommon, I would say.
That is a good question. And I think when you look at it on the CV, it looks like a harsh break. Truth is, it was a bit softer, change. When I joined, I loved Apple products always. I worked with them as a musician as well. And before, there was a lot of change in my life and on different levels. And I decided again to go to Mexico to spend some time in Latin America, just, to have a break from my life, basically. And before that, I applied at Apple to work there part-time and still work as a musician for, producing music, but not playing so much the saxophone. And yeah, when I came back, actually they called me in Mexico and said, hey, you could start at Apple opening a new store, the flagship store in Berlin. And
which one was it? Which Berlin store?
Fürstendamm.
Okay. Was it the first one?
It was the first one in Berlin. Yeah, exactly. And then I decided to come back, and basically the rest happened within Apple. I went through a lot of development programs, and I just loved learning and development.
Yeah, this is who you are today, right?
Yes.
From a career perspective, a learning and development expert.
I hope so. I was not sure about the word expert, but I tried to be curious enough, to.
Okay, at least I know it.
Yeah. Okay, you can say this. But yeah, exactly. So I'm currently working learning and development and leading a team.
Can we dive a bit into the time at Apple? Mm-hmm. What shaped you most there? Because I think it's 7 years, wow, and also a very big name. Mm-hmm. With a lot of processes, I guess, and a lot of structures and principles, but also maybe some things that when there's a new store, you just need to build from scratch as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think what I loved most at Apple is how they look at development. And perhaps in retail, you wouldn't expect a company to look so deep into development, but Apple is really focused on this, developing employees, no matter in which position. And they have a bunch of nice programs and just principles. And I guess I can't, talk about all the details because there's also a lot of confidentiality. But it's really a good experience, I think, for employees also to develop their skills in whatever environment they are. So that's what I loved. Why did I spend so much time at Apple? Because I think it's a great company. I learned a lot over the years. I had very different positions. I joined in sales and, then I developed into the leadership positions and then into people management, ultimately in learning and development. And there was always more to learn. And that's how I try to look at my career. Is there more to learn for me? Is there more to give from my side? Can I add value in any sense? And for 7 years, I had the feeling, absolutely. And then I felt, it's time to move on and look into a different field.
And you did several training roles there as a store trainer. Mm-hmm. What is a store trainer doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for example, when new products are released, there needs to be training. When new services are released, there needs to be training and basically organizing.
Like on every iPhone, for instance.
There are also trainings, of course, if there are new features, a new function and so on, stuff has to be trained.
Like software update, and then you need to educate.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, not for every little thing, but the big ones have to be trained thoroughly. And also services, just how you approach customers and all of these things.
And that's unique at the Apple Store, I would say.
I'm not sure because I didn't work in a lot of retail environments or other.
No, but just when I go in shopping
yes.
and I go to the Apple Store, I feel good.
Yes.
And I spend some money.
That's good to hear. I think Yeah, it's true. I think there's a lot of thought going into this, and they really.
There's always someone not available, maybe, because sometimes it's crowded.
Yeah.
But you always get support.
Yeah.
And you get the feeling that people want to take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they want you to buy a product, but it doesn't also feel that you are being sold, because it's really, they provide an experience that you enjoy the buying process.
Yes. A lot of my old friends from Apple will be happy to hear that.
You need to send the link.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I think they do a really good job.
Did you also train on that?
Yes, on different aspects.
How do you train employees, or also maybe evaluate or hire? What do you spot that you get to that experience? What is all included there?
Yeah. I would say each part plays its role. So, from recruiting, from sourcing to looking for the right people and then giving them a good onboarding, which is the ultimately first step in being successful. And then keeping it up and thinking about, there's also challenging situations in Apple stores, of course, like difficult conversations and so on. So very, I would say, basic conversational skills and transferable skills, which you can train in a very different ways. And that's what I still do sometimes today, right? You have the same when you work in a scale-up and are in touch with customers, or even internally when you're in teams and discuss with your, team members difficult topics. It's a skill that you can learn. And that's how I try to look at things as well, very skills-based. You might have heard that in the last 2.5 years.
Yes. Yes. And I also really like the concept you built there with the whole competency frameworks and so on. Did you also have that at Apple?
Kind of, yeah. I can't talk too much about that, I guess, right now.
Okay.
But competencies are a topic for sure.
Okay, but there was a concept in place, and it was intertwined with how you evaluate people, how you train people, how you onboard people, and then also how you rate performance and so on.
Yeah, to a certain degree, yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then if you cannot talk too much about it, then let's jump. And then, you made a break then, again, somewhere traveling or so on, or just resetting?
Actually, I just became father, I think, short before I left Apple, or not too short before.
The first time?
For the first time, yeah, my first kid. And when I quit Apple, I basically, I was still very happy and I enjoyed my work there, but I felt, like I said, I wanted to be in a different environment, really small companies, and, just seeing how is a company built from scratch and how do you build all of these learning environments. And I wanted to take some time to find a good company for that and not rushing into the next opportunity. And I was so, there were so many things happening in my life, like being father of a small kid and then having this full-time job. And I just wanted to have a break, come down, run a lot, meditate a bit, and then go back to it.
Do you meditate often?
Not anymore, not too much. From time to time, yes. Back then I was meditating daily, each and every single day.
What did it do to you?
I think perhaps it stems from the fact that I'm a bit more on the introverted side of things, and I feel I recharge in, kind of in silence, or when I read, or when I run, or when I'm alone. And this is the ultimate moment to be alone with yourself is meditation, I feel. True. Because you think, you look at your thoughts and you look how to let thoughts go, basically, and how to free yourself from stuff that's unnecessary, basically. And I think it did a lot on, how mentally cope with stress situations and so on. I'm still feel that I built some skills there, or trained my mind in a certain sense that helped me being resilient today.
I would really appreciate if you would subscribe to the show in case you like it. Yes, I also had a period of life where I meditated, I think, daily for 2 months.
Yeah.
And I remember back then it was, especially when I transitioned first time from a individual contributor role into a manager role.
Yeah.
That was such hard for me because I have a very strong edge for an action of bias.
Yes.
And if I spotted certain things, I wanted directly jump into it.
Solve them, or
in the beginning, of course, you don't have to lead or work with more senior people, it was also more junior staff, or not maybe junior, but early stage company people, not so experienced maybe.
A lot of things going
and then
on.
also managers like me, not so experienced. Oh, and then a bias for action, a very strong one, where you always just jump in instead of, okay, the other person should fix that.
Yes.
Oh, that was so hard for me. That was so hard.
Yes.
And there I really consciously started meditating and reading specific books and that helped me change my behavior and control my temper.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful. And I always thought, again, as you said, I still need to do this again, because sometimes it just helps. But you need to prioritize it, right? You make it a priority, and then it does a lot with you.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's very true. What you're talking about is kind of impulse control, like when, you know, this moment of having an emotion, wanting to jump in, wanting to go into a fight or whatever it might be, but having this millisecond of, you know, being able to go out of your body and thinking, you know, perhaps this is not the right thing to do.
Being water, my friend.
Being water, my friend. That's the very high level description, which I still like. But yeah, for sure. I mean, the best, I think I meditated 2 years every day. And I only managed to because I built some kind of habit. I knew that there's a certain time in the day when I would meditate, in the evening actually. And it gets more tricky with kids because your schedule is harder to control. And
a lot of ad hoc requests.
Exactly. That's a beautiful way of saying. I wish Jira would be there sometime. But yeah, it still helps. And I think I still benefit a lot from doing it very intensely for a certain time. And when I meditate, like I'm back in the habit rather quickly, I would say, or like I feel I'm.
There is also companies that offer headspace for as an employer for their employees.
Yes.
Do you think that's first a smart idea or a valuable benefit? And also, do you think that companies do utilize it or could utilize it?
Mm-hmm. I know for a fact, I mean, I meditated with Headspace a lot, and I know for a fact that they have, you know, they offer this for companies, and I think a bunch of companies do it. And the thing is, I love it, but I know, you know, some other people might go boxing instead, and that's okay, as long as it does for them what it does for me, you know, when I go meditating.
For me, it's tennis.
It's tennis.
I show you the rackets, right?
Yes, you did. And yeah, you know, that's so fair. The question is, what do you need to do? Like, do you know what you need to do in order to be resilient and kind of manage your emotions and come down and recharge and so on? And I think it's different for everyone. So I'm a huge fan of having the choice and giving people the choice what they want to go for, and could be Headspace for some, but I also acknowledge that other people might not benefit from it as much as
some also do Wim Hof, you know it?
Wim Hof? Oh yeah, sure. I thought about it, but then kind of it felt too much.
Yeah, I also once tried this for a week with a friend in the office, and we sat together like for, I think, 10 minutes, and we did this breathing exercises, and sometimes an employee, it was still pre-COVID, everybody had his rooms, and I had an own office back then, and another colleague had also its own office, and then we sat together in a room, and then an employee needed something, looked into it, and we were like
breathing heavily.
And they were like,
not a good sign.
What the fuck are they doing? I thought they have a meeting.
Yeah, but I actually like this. I mean, this even, if you remember TaxFix, we had a meditation room.
Yes, that's cool.
And I used it sometimes. And that's actually better than an office because there are no misunderstandings. What is happening there?
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, I think it's really good to give the opportunity and in the end see, you know, what do people choose, and that's a really good approach.
That's so, the whole mindfulness space, I think it's sometimes so underrated.
Yeah.
Because it can it can unlock so many things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And also prevent so many burnouts, injuries, whatever it is.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it all starts in the head, right? Whatever we decide to do, not decide to do, how we decide to relate to topics. I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing I think I got from meditation is things will happen, like, you know, a lot of stuff will happen and you can't control it, but you can control how you relate to stuff. So if something bad is happening, you can still think about how do I relate to this? How do I want to react to this? What does it mean for me, right? Giving it a sense. And if you manage to do this, it's kind of, a really cool ability, I think.
But then you chose TaxFix.
Mm-hmm.
What made you choose TaxFix?
That's a really good question. I think I, doing the interviews, when I met my former manager, Marie, I just noticed that it was really a good fit, and we had similar views on a few topics, but I also trusted that we would be able to challenge each other. And it felt like, good relationship from the beginning. That was a really important factor for me. Number 2 is how TaxFix talks about culture. And I think, every company has their recruiting website with values and culture on it and so on. And that's great. But in the end, I think there's a lot of different ways of implementing this and how seriously you take it. And what I felt at TaxFix from the beginning is that the founders were very serious about it, and they really
also
tried
very
to establish
authentic,
it.
right?
Yes, exactly. It's not something that you just talk about because it sounds cool, but they really thought about it deeply, and it felt really embedded in the company. How we in every process and so on, you could kind of see how it relates to values. Not every, but I mean, the high level processes.
Which value stuck out most to you?
Yeah. Develop is one of the values, and I would lie if I would say that I didn't like it. I think I thought the most about understand. What is the values? Understand, deliver, develop, trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought a lot about understand and about the balance that you need to strike in understanding context, understanding problems, how to frame problems and so on, and how you can balance this with delivering stuff and what a good moment is to deliver, and, not having the complete picture and not being 100% certain, but rather, just going for it, experimenting. And I think I learned a lot about that from working at TaxFix.
And you joined early when they were still small, I guess, right?
Yeah, they grew a bit already. I think it was around 200 people, a bit bigger when I joined.
Or not so small, yeah.
Yeah. And then they grew to, around 500-600 right now. So
yeah, I think even 700 before. Yeah, something like this.
Yeah, it was a high growth phase for sure. When I had the first conversations, it was a lot around growth pain and how to tackle it.
Okay, now we need to talk about that phase, because I think that especially I was really surprised in a positive way that TaxFix at this stage of the company thought about many things in general, and also in the people function. And they never really had a CPO until last year Eva joined.
Yes.
I joined as an interim manager same time, 2 weeks earlier. And previously it was led by Daniel Kreter, who is one of the early employees, managing director now, and COO. And they thought about a lot.
Yes.
And now I'm interested in how did you build out all the learning and development schemes, career development processes and everything, because it's really good.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think it reminds me of a book titled Bird by Bird, which is basically step by step, right? So you look at one thing after the other, and you try to bring people that can, help with this. And I think Marie played a huge part in this. And that's obviously, because I saw this closest, I know what she built even before I joined. So there was already some of the stuff. So it's not that I had to build from zero. And I think it's also how you think about people, right? How much thought you give it. And I think TaxFix also understood early on that you need to focus on this, and you need to give the right resources and the right thought to people topics. And sometimes it's just, do you really take it seriously, or do you see it as a, kind of support function that has to run while the other really important things go? And I felt that it was quite different, that there was a lot of thought about this.
And you started as a learning and development partner, people development partner. What is somebody like this doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing in learning and development is that usually titles don't tell you a lot about what people are doing because it's a relatively young field, I would say. And in the beginning, what I did is really, building basic stuff from scratch, like workshops for the team, hosting workshops, building manager onboarding, for example, building a leadership development program. So things that in a, let's say, grown company or enterprises you assume that are there, but all of this has to be built and built according to context. It's not something that you can just replicate, take from somewhere and then, press into a company. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And yeah, really step by step thinking about what is needed, and above all thinking about what are the principles that we need to consider in order to create kind of an effective learning environment, right? Because one part of learning is, and I'm talking about learning and development in the workplace, which I think is a totally different thing than being in university or being in school and learning.
What are the differences?
I mean, in university and school, usually it's only about classroom training, meaning there's one person sharing content, sharing, principles, ideas, approaches, whatever. And usually the other side absorbs it and, makes sense of it.
And it's repeated.
Exaggerated, right?
Yeah.
But like it's a lot about memorization and about learning what is already given. And I know there's also transformation in schools and so on, but I would say this is still the very basic approach. And in workplace learning, you have to learn, and it's obviously in school, it's about a variety of topics that are hopefully important for life. So hopefully it's a good curation. In the workplace, it's highly contextual. The question is, what do people need to be successful in a given project, role? And this might change really quickly. So what is important today might not be important tomorrow. That's, in our times at least, the tricky part. And yeah, also you're not there all day learning, right? In the sense of having time to learn. Like there's not 6 hours of your day learning, which happens in school, right?
Yes.
And so you basically need to think, how can I learn while I'm on the job? Which I think is a great thing to do, but it's different than how people usually think about learning. And you have to help people understand, how can I do that and how can I make it useful? And helping people understand that, I think that's an important part of learning and development.
Do you think that the schooling system and the education system is still solid or good enough of what is needed in the workplace?
Yeah. Truth be told, I don't know, because when I went to school, that's, I don't know.
And your children are still too young.
More than 20 years back. So.
Your children are also still too young, right, for the school?
Yes, exactly. They just come to school. And I think there has been quite some change in the meantime. I think the most important part I consider in learning at the moment is how can I not teach, but rather help people making sense of things and, finding the right resources, trainings, whatever they need.
Connect them to people, right?
Connect them to people, learn from others, learn from their experience, reflecting about experience versus telling them what to do, right? And that's a tricky thing sometimes to do, especially when there's a lot of pressure and a lot of workload. But I still think this is the right way to go. Does this happen in school? I'm not sure. I mean, of course, I learned useful stuff in school. I wouldn't say it's the way I learn today, and I would prefer to learn today. But it's a big question, and it would be easy to bash now and say, it's a bad school system. Truth be told, I don't really know.
The only thing what I would raise as feedback to schools is why don't they, for instance, teach simple legal stuff?
Yeah.
What you really need, maybe.
Yeah.
Because or how to pay a bill.
Yeah.
Or register an apartment or something like this. Very basic stuff at some point, right? And of course, people can read and then they can figure that out. But I think some practical stuff is sometimes maybe missing.
Yes.
I went to a very practical high school, like a mechanical engineering college, high school, where it was A levels. And once a week we were in the in a factory building stuff.
Yes.
I think it was cool, but it was also not so relevant because I moved to a very different field.
Yeah.
But there you got a lot of concepts and principles you learned in physics or in other subjects, and then you applied them.
Yes.
That was really nice because sometimes I then understood in the factory area, oh, this is what we just learned.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
Yes.
And it helped me from translate abstract thinking into concrete actions. What does it mean and how can I imagine it?
Yes.
And I'm way better in just practical stuff than in all this theoretical stuff.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. I'm too impatient as well.
That's interesting to hear. I think that's such a good example of how we put things into practice, and that's, I would say, perhaps one of the most the biggest misunderstandings in learning, that once you know about something that you're able to do it. So the example would be, if I read a book about something, I know about it, and the assumption very often is that I can do it, right? I know a lot of people who've read about coaching in a book, and I know very few people who are really good coaches in real life. Actually, I know a bunch, but I think, and this is where a lot of things stem from, like, being overconfident, or, even being reluctant to jumping into things because you're not super sure how to do it. And what I would suggest is, like, really, the moment you acquire knowledge, like, finding a way to apply it somehow, because it will be different in real life than it was in the book, in a training or whatever it was where you learned about it.
What do you think what role does confidence play in learning?
A big one for sure. I mean, I think I would perhaps not say confidence, because confidence for sure is important, but if you have the right environment that is psychologically safe, then people will be more confident by default. So building this environment where you tell people they can try stuff out, they can learn from failure and so on, will help a lot in making people more confident, let's say, because you get confident by doing, right? And you get good feedback or, recognition, and then the next time you will jump in.
And how do you build a workplace that allows learning and development where people have confidence in that?
Yeah. I mean, at TaxFix, I saw a lot of great examples of that by mentioning it, by speaking about it, by saying it is okay to try things out, and it's okay to fail as long as you learn from it. And as long as you talk about the different types of failure, there's kind of unnecessary failure, right? When you just not do something that you know how to do and that needs to get done. Like, this is not failure in a sense that would be helpful, but experimental failure is, of course, good, because you try something out and you learn from how it works, how it doesn't work, and then you can do something different the next time. And by speaking about it, and I heard that a lot, announcing it and saying, hey, be bold, try it out. And then, I mean, most importantly, the question is, how do you react then to it when it really happens? Like, it's easy to say, but, once something goes wrong, the question is, how does leadership respond, and how, do peers respond? And if the reaction is good and fair, then people will do it again. It's as simple.
I think sometimes that is so, as you describe it, simple, but in reality, not so easy to implement, especially when you work on cross-functional projects. And you would need to have, for instance, several learnings or different behaviors from several departments or different roles, like an engineer, a product manager, maybe a recruiter, and someone from sales and support. They need to work on something common, and then it fails. And then it's obvious that the problem why it fails or failed is not so straightforward. It's not one person or one thing that happened wrong. It's usually a bunch of things, and there's also a prehistory of it, right?
Yes, of course.
Do you also see that as part of learning and development, or just of part of the culture, that companies or individuals should also create, let's say, postmortems or debriefs by default and say, hey, we need to learn from it? Or is this something unique?
Yes.
How would you rate that?
I would say there's no super clear line, but for sure there, is something around. I mean, when you look into how product teams work and so on, they have really good thinking around this. Engineers, of course, when they have the retros and so on. And of course, that's learning. I mean, everything is learning, right? In the end, we all learn all the time. There's no way we don't learn. The question is just how fast, how much, what do we learn? Is it relevant to what we do? All of these questions. And I would think about it on two levels. One level is individually. So the question would be, there are 10 people in a cross-functional team. So everybody can look at their actions and what they did and how it turned out. And that's personal learning for me, which I think should happen all the time. And then, of course, it's more complex to look at it in the group. And there are different ways to go about this. But I think having retros, having events where you reflect about what went well and what didn't, it needs a setup, basically. And honestly, it's like a science for itself, how to set this up in the right way. But I think there's always overlaps with learning. And the question is how I define learning and development.
And how would you, now looking back, build a learning and development strategy for an organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Small question. That's what I'm doing at the moment for Superside. I mean, I think traditionally, it would be perhaps a bit too much to tell, about whole learning and development strategies, but I can talk about it high level. I think traditionally, the approach to learning and development very often has been that it is very limited in the scope, right? So it's only about a certain training or about educating about a process, something like this, versus thinking about it as something that's happening everywhere all the time. And that's how I love to think about it. And if you look at it this way, the question is, there are many implications. One question would be, if it happens everywhere, how do I measure success in the end, right? So I need different success measurements in different areas that tell me, am I doing well or am I not doing well? So is it effective what I'm doing? Then the second thing is, how can I, like in very busy environments, and I'm taking two examples that wouldn't be super traditionally in L&D, how can I, when I build great stuff, great program or great approaches, how do I share them? How do I market them internally? How do I help people jumping on the offer and really doing it and, using it? Because that's what I've seen as well a lot, is there's not a lot of engagement in learning activities. And it's a shame, because very often it's not about the quality of the offer, but rather about, do people rate it as high as in priority that they have, on the deliverables or, the things that they need to do in the end. So thinking about how do I announce this? How do I create engagement is something really important. How do I create accountability is a really important topic. How does it rank in the organization? How do leaders look at this? In the end, if a manager sits in a conversation with their employee and they ask, should I either do this or go learn? There's different answers to this. And I acknowledge, sometimes it's just about getting things done. But if you never create the space for learning, people will not grow and people will not learn from what they do. And that's a danger to the organization, of course. And that's kind of the mid-level I see, measurement is one of the starting points that's really important.
And how do you measure progress or outcomes from learning and development?
Yeah. That's perhaps the most discussed topic in the learning and development community right now, and I love this topic. And I would say there's different approaches to this. One very traditional approach is called Kirkpatrick's model, which is about, you have a training, you ask people after the training, hey, was the knowledge relevant? Did you like the training? Then 2 months afterwards, you send out a survey, say, did you see any behavior change? You ask other people, like, did Thomas do something differently right now? Did he coach you more? Things like these after coaching program. And then ultimately you try to find measurements for ROI in the end, right? So because you coached more, people were able to solve more problems, which helped us developing new products more quickly, whatever it might be. That's very abstract. The challenge is in the last field that I say, how do I measure return of investment in the end? And that's super hard to do. My best approach at the moment is identify KPIs and what I would call observable features of of a successful outcome. So the question is, when somebody approaches you with a learning project, my first question would be, what is the business impact you want to generate with this, right? You're thinking about coaching, talking a lot about coaching today. There's other examples as well. You want to help your leader being better coaches, but why? What kind of impact does it generate in the end? What is the ideal outcome? And then there are different answers to this. I want employees to feel better, being more engaged, so I can look at engagement numbers. Or the second example that I just mentioned, I need to solve problems more quickly. And I believe if I coach people and if I use different perspectives from different people versus leaders telling how to get it done, then I will solve more problems in a short amount of time. Could be another measurement. And, of course, there's areas where this is easier, saying if you want to generate more sales and you train people in pitching products, then it's quite easy to measure, like, did they sell more afterwards, right? There's a really hard KPI. It can be really tough for leaders, for example, right? How do you measure leadership effectiveness? And there's also answers, but you have to look a bit closer. But above all, I think it's important to ask yourself the question, what is the impact that I'm hoping for? Because I feel a lot of people have more of a reflex, like, we need this kind of leadership development program, without answering the question first, what is the ideal outcome of it? And once you start that way, like, you have very interesting discussions. And there's no easy answers. And I've seen a lot of top leaders as well not having fantastic answers to this, which is okay, but we need to have the discussion.
Yes. How would you measure the effectiveness of a leader?
I would say there's different ways to look at this. What does effectiveness mean? I would ask, and then could be having a really engaged team. So to increase employee retention, to increase, wellness, basically. The other one could be, managing for performance. So basically, how do you set high standards? How do you help people reach those high standards without burning themselves? And it depends a bit, I would say, on the, in the end, I would say it's a mixture of all of these, but it depends a bit on the company as well. Where do people stand right now? And perhaps you have a fantastic high performance culture in the sense of, really high levels, but you're not taking care of people.
Elbows out and deliver.
Exactly. That might be.
That exists.
Yeah. So I would say the answer depends, right? And there's always different things leadership in itself is also, we could talk 1 hour about what leadership is. There would be no problem.
Yes. And what do you think does the first manager play as a role in your further career?
You mean the first manager that you have for somebody starting?
Where you learn the basics, basically.
Yeah. If I look back at it, I think I still know a lot of examples, moments when I spoke to one of my leaders and I had these aha moments like, oh dear, that's what I need to do, or this is how I can look at it differently. And what I would say as well, it's not always the direct leader that you have, but somebody that leads in a certain field or that you relate to, could even be a peer or a mentor, whatever it might be. But I think it has a huge impact on your journey. And whenever I was successful, I had great leaders. That's what I can say for sure. Sometimes what I did when I felt, I perhaps didn't have the leadership that I was looking for, I would look for other people to kind of jump in and substitute, or just ask them, can you mentor me on this? Can you help me here? But I think it's a huge impact. And obviously, how, if you think about weekly one-on-ones, and so this is the strongest relationship that you can have in business, basically. And huge impact, I would say.
Yeah. I had a very impactful first leader, Christoph. Shout out to Christoph. But I think he was more somebody, not a good manager, very organized, but also he looked really into the profiles of people. Also, I hired a lot with him together.
Yes.
And also, he ever looked at people's development and companies' development in stages, and also what does a team need to be complementary, and what does it need a team need in terms of spikes, not just from skills but also from personalities.
Yes.
And that was so insightful, and I learned so many things about myself, and I got also pushed through a lot.
Yeah.
And it was also a 5 years journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 5 years, same leader. Wow, that's
Yeah.
really intense.
It's a
And
long time. That's really
both
long
people super fast always had to develop. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this journey was super insightful, and I was so grateful and still great. I'm so grateful for all the experiences there
Yes.
and the learnings I got, because it's so valuable if somebody really wants to tackle that together with you
Yeah.
and really wants to invest time in you.
Yes.
And also get something out of it, of course, right?
Yeah.
But it was such a strong learning experience, and the most shaping, I would say, phase was when we looked a lot into strategy consultancies, for instance, like the McKinseys out there,
Yeah.
on how they solve problems.
Yeah.
Because we could not afford hire a McKinsey consultant, but
Yeah.
we, of course, got contact with them, and
Yes.
some did us some favors, and some we interviewed, and then we tried to learn everything from it, and just the way of thinking.
Yeah.
This was, I think, the most mind-blowing aspect in terms of learning experience I had
Yes.
on how to really analyze certain situations, problems in a very standardized, structured way,
Yeah.
that you kind of can solve every problem.
Yeah.
The only thing you need to do is understand the problem.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that was really like, we did some learning and development. We did not call it like that, but journeys, like, is intense. Like every Saturday,
Yes.
we sat together in the office
Yeah.
and did retros with a small team to
Yeah.
say, okay, what happened there? What books could we read into?
Yeah.
And how do we interpret it? Wow.
Yeah.
Time consuming.
Yeah.
This is why we did it on Saturdays.
Yeah.
And it was also a bit volunteering, right?
Yeah.
But if you do this with intense work in parallel, and then also really zoom out,
Yes.
but from different functions and different levels,
Yeah.
oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. That sounds good.
why can't companies do this during work time?
Yeah. I mean, I could ask this question back. But I think.
Yeah, now we were just too busy, but
Yeah.
I think this is what you
Yeah.
were also describing, by not just always delivering
Exactly.
and doing this in parallel. Wow,
Yeah.
mind-blowing. And also for every, especially young leader, I would say, or young person that just gets started,
Yes.
sometimes I think that they're too much in a bubble and
Yeah.
stuck with the task, instead of zooming out again and say, okay, that's now done.
Yes.
Let's move ahead. Let's do something different.
Yes. Yeah, and you can help people doing that by having moments of reflection, or communities of practice, or whatever it might be, but yet basically connecting them and creating the space to exchange on that. And that's also what I tried to establish in some moments. But yeah, I mean, the question is, of course, how much time do you give for this, and which value do you
Yes,
give?
yes. And then you moved to Superside now.
Yes, yeah, just 4 weeks ago, actually.
What is Superside doing?
Superside is basically offering what they call creative as a service. So you can basically ask for creative work. It's a subscription model, and companies can basically get design assets to really extensive design strategies, to whole campaigns built by Superside. And it's really high qualitative design work, because Superside has fantastic designers, like a huge team of fantastic designers, and they basically can staff different teams just for your purpose in the end. So, the companies might approach them and say, hey, we need to build this kind of campaign, or we need a more strategic consultancy here regarding a certain project. And then Superside can staff a team, build all of this creative products, assets, and also look at the bigger picture and think about how can you make this successful.
And the company also grew quite recently, right? We are 760 employees.
Yes.
And remote only.
Remote only, exactly. Native remote company, yeah.
How is the communication ways internally and all the documentation different, for instance, to TaxFix? Because TaxFix is more hybrid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's different. I mean, what I saw a bunch of differences, and it's just the beginning. But one thing is you need a place to capture processes, all information that's important for people to get basically async. So you cannot communicate a lot in sync because in Superside we have, I think, people in 60 countries or even more in the meantime. So there's a lot of different time zones. There's just no way to get everyone together like every week or all the time. There's still places when we come together to meet, but in the end, that's not a concept that works. So you need to have really good documentation. You need to write it down. You need to understand what you need to capture where and in which format that makes sense to everyone. And I think they did a great job in doing this. And, I think the company is built on this idea of being remote, which I think makes it easier sometimes versus being a company that exists in an office and then moves into a remote model or hybrid model, because the very foundation is really important, I find. Also how you think about creating community, how you create connection, how to honestly, I had to download programs to see time zones on a scale because I don't know when to reach people and how to find a time to meet 3 people at the same time. And it's just very basic stuff as well that you need to help employees understand.
And do you think that this will be a different challenge for you in your role in a remote environment versus a non-remote?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Because, if you think about async learning a lot, there's a lot of implications. It's not as easy to bring people together very often. It's still possible. I learned my day looks like things are more happening in the afternoon right now because this is the time when the world meets kind of during the day. But that's one of the reasons I joined, because I think it's such an interesting challenge, and it's also the challenge of the future, right? How do you make async learning happen and contextual learning still, while not making it only reading, basically, or
I hate when somebody sends me a Notion page and says read it.
Yeah, they're very long Notion pages. That's true. And still, it's so useful when you need it and you know how to find it. The moment you need it. That's the most important stuff, I think. When to find things that really help you. I feel relevance in general is something really important. The stuff that I'm reading right now, is it really relevant to me? The stuff that I need to learn right now, is it relevant to me, or is it just because somebody else thinks it's relevant?
Super interesting. So are you excited about the new challenge?
I'm excited?
Yes.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, for sure. It's a great start. And, not too much I can tell right now just because I'm just 4 weeks in, but I found a fantastic team, very kind people in general. And I think also, the question I always ask myself is, I think I mentioned it in the beginning, what can I learn from this journey? What can I help others understand, perhaps? And I feel, both of these questions I can answer with a lot of things that make me excited.
Nice. What or who else, I don't know, but should I have on the show?
Oh, wow. That's a live question.
That's a live question. Yeah, that's a live question.
Who would be interesting to interview? I think ultimately I learned a lot from Eva, and I don't know if you had her on the podcast.
Yes, next week.
Okay.
And I know her.
Somebody that you don't know. You said, okay, that's tricky. Because we've been working together for a long time.
We can also follow up on that.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I think I will. Sorry, no.
No, all good. All good. Yeah, then thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Thomas.